Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. So once again, I'm very excited to welcome back who I will be as bold to call friend of the show, Karl Sakas, who helps digital agency owners work less and earn more while rewarding their best employees. Drawing on his background in agency operations, Karl has personally advised hundreds of agencies on every inhabited continent. Karl, when are you going to get to Antarctica? I mean, what is
working on it? As soon as I would start an agency, I'll be there to help.
It'll be like the movie The Thing, if you've ever seen that, but the agency version of that. Anyway, it's worth a watch. So I digress, though. An international speaker, he's the author of 3 books, including Work Less, Earn More, and more than 450 articles on agency management. When he's not helping clients, Karl volunteers as a bartender on an antique train, which sounds like a very good thing to do during the holiday season. I'd love to have a few drinks on an antique train. So Karl, welcome back.
Dan, great to be here.
I guess my first question is, what are you seeing these days?
Yeah, well, so this is working with agencies all over the world and focused especially in the US. People are looking for new business. There's a focus on growing pipeline. Things have been slower lately, but, hopefully post-election, things should be more clear as people figure out what to do next and clients get ready to spend money. So I think there's frustration about slow pipelines, but also hope that throughout 2025, things will get better.
Yeah, and I love that you hit on that because I'll get that sort of question from clients too in the context of new business where it's like, what are you seeing? Things are slower, election, global warming, macro, this and that, interest rates. And it's always a challenge. Like on one hand, you have to be conscious of these things that are real. On the other hand, it's like, it's impossible to tell how the macro is affecting your 10, 20 person agency. And also it's like, how do you even, it's outside of your control ultimately. Right. So I'd love to know, how do you recommend clients respond to the macro?
Well, always be selling, or certainly doing marketing to then drive the sales. There's that feast or famine problem that agencies often run into where there's so much work, they stop their own marketing, or vice versa, and it's panic and you're trying to get business in. What I practice is a consistent approach to marketing. I send an email newsletter, I do various thought leadership things. In over 11 years, I think only twice has the email not gone out as planned. Once there was some sort of a technical failure that had happened over the weekend, we didn't notice it until Monday. And the other time I was in the hospital with a ruptured appendix. Although, shame on me, I should have planned further ahead on that one, scheduling the email. So, I see my marketing as something that has to happen no matter what. And it's evolved in different ways over time. But for anyone who's listening who's like, oh, we're really busy now, let's slow down our marketing, you're going to regret it in 6 months. Don't do it.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that's important to point out, which is we've sort of been in the same position with the show. There was a period where we went from 1 week to every 2 weeks, but that was deliberate due to lots of things going on in the company, and then we bounced back again. And I will say that there is something to having a thing. Like for us, it's a podcast. For other people, it might be a newsletter. But having a thing that's branded that you ship on a particular day of the week, every week or whatever your ideal cadence is, and then you don't make excuses around it, I think is important. Can you dig into that a little bit? What have you seen work for that busy agency that's I know I should be doing content, but I'm not. What's the thing you advise them to do?
I would say, think about what you like doing. And this is either, for listener, if you're an agency owner or if you're supporting the owners, what can you sustain? For instance, sometimes people ask, should they blog? I'm like, well, first, do you like writing? If you don't like writing, you're not going to enjoy it. People are like, should we do public speaking? If you like public speaking, yes. If you hate it, don't do it. You're not going to keep up with that. So I'd say the ideal self-marketing activity for agencies is something that you can sustain. I'm actually heading to New York to visit the 4A's Angles Conference, which is about agency self-marketing. And one of the things they have is around various panels with editors and other journalists from Ad Age, Adweek, The Wall Street Journal, and others sharing about how they like to be pitched. On the other hand, if you hate pitching people, PR may not be the right approach, or maybe you should hire a publicist or a PR agency if that's not your specialty. So I'd say focus on something you can sustain. I have sent that email newsletter. Originally, it was twice a month, then it was weekly, and now it's actually twice a week with a mix of new content and classic content. You need to be willing to sustain it. If, you're listening, you're like, you know what, I can manage one blog post a month. Ideally, you would do more, but if you can sustain that, do one a month forever, or at least, maybe commit to 6 months and then hopefully you'll keep it up after that. Don't overcommit.
Right. It's sort of like the person that's like, well, I can't, I don't have time to go jogging, so I just won't jog at all. Versus like, well, could you jog once a week instead of 5 times a week, So makes sense.
I was discussing that with a client recently where, they had mentioned they have family time, but not leisure time. And obviously there are a lot of different factors going on there. But one of the things that I mentioned was, this is in their agency growth diagnostic report. What are the things they like doing? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. If they had 15 minutes, what is something they can do? So like I'm learning how to do watercolor painting. And now that I have some of the basics down and some of the materials, I had 15 minutes the other day and I painted an iris, the flower. It's not great, but you know what? I got it done and it fit in that 15-minute block. And the next one would be better.
Yeah, and I feel like that sort of thing is becoming more and more important as there are so many distractions that will make you feel worse for doing them, right? Like whether it's LinkedIn or, social media or like just tinkering with some tech tool, but not really getting anywhere with it. So
yes, I'm starting a new tool on that, one that my own coach recommended. It's an app with a physical component that called Bricked.
yeah.
Or Brick, where it'll brick your phone. You can specify how it works, but basically you tap it and it disables various apps and so on. And then you have to tap it again to re-enable access. There is apparently an emergency mode if there's really a problem, but
I have heard of it.
Yeah. So I'm just starting with it. So I don't have results yet, but I hear good things.
Yeah, it seems fun. It seems like it makes a lot of sense. Back to content. I mean, one thing that I think is important with content that nobody told me is that it's not really going to be like this direct funnel like channel to new business. It's more of like this plant or this garden that you just kind of keep nurturing. And I think this is happening more and more, even with ads or even with stuff where there's a more direct funnel, is that we want the funnel to just be this straight line, but it's like more of just this kind of like mouse's maze or something, this roundabout thing. But what I did see happen from content was stuff that I wouldn't have thought, like not so much direct client inquiries right away, although that did happen, but more like partners and referral partners and stuff that were back on our radar, or vice versa from that. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what's been your client's experience?
Well, I mean, it's not all just SEO. I mean, I think historically it's like you should put out content so it gets indexed so people find you, and there still is value in that. But, as I think about some of the articles I write, and I encourage clients to do the same thing, some of the articles are what I'd think of as sales support articles. It's advice that maybe no one is directly searching for it, but if I'm in a sales conversation, I can share the article in chat, or someone reaches out and I'd say, yes, I have experience with that. And I'm able to link to an article about, say, agency business models or team structure options or other things like that. They're getting a link to an article that's anywhere from, 1,000 to a couple thousand words. It demonstrates my expertise. So even if no one searched for that article, the fact that I had it ready to share in the conversation or in the email thread, there's value to it.
Right. And I think that's a really good point, because a lot of the times, like we have, especially in B2B, we have this like left brain mentality all the time, which is like, I'm going to put this content in front of somebody. They're going to read it all. They're going to understand my worldview and be smarter, and then they'll sign up with me. But the reality is the fact that you just were able to send that link with that title, it checks a box for busy people, right?
Yeah.
Even if they don't consume it all.
Something else to consider too, especially if you're looking to sell your agency. I think of a continuum: lifestyle agency at one end, equity agency, you want an exit at the other end. If you're looking to sell, I ask new clients, where do they fall in that continuum? And Most people lean one way or the other, but if someone is leaning toward an exit, toward an equity agency, at some point I'll take a look at their blog and I'll see for their agency's blog, is their name on every blog post? That's something they'll need to change if they want to sell. I had a client where the goal was to step back more and more over time, whether to sell or at least to move into a chair role rather than being the day-to-day CEO. And when we started working together, they were the name or the byline on a majority of the posts. And now they're the byline on 10 to 20% of the posts. The team is getting it done. They've made themselves more optional.
Right. There's a lot to dig into there. I think the first thing before we threw on the recorder, you're talking about how the volume of agencies kind of interested in exits is going up. It seems to be more. Why do you think that's happening?
I mean, running an agency is a hard business and a hard job. As I talk about in the intro to the Work Less, Earn More book, also available in Audible if you prefer to listen, it's a services business, so it is people dependent. But say if a chief marketing officer or CMO hires a plumber to work on something at the CMO's house, it's usually pretty clear if the work is done and the work is done correctly. Like things aren't leaking anymore, or they've installed the new water heater or what have you. Like it's done. Whereas that same CMO could hire an agency, and that was a question of, well, is it good enough? Is it really done? Or, is there more to it? Kind of thing. Agencies are selling a very intangible thing, what's known as a credence good, where you don't know if the marketing or creative or technical work was good until potentially months or years later. It's kind of like picking a college, right? I have a series on paying for college for agency owners, because agency owners likely are not going to get any financial aid for their kids based on how the formulas work. Picking the right school, like you're probably not going to know until 20 years from now. For sure. It's tough to sell that. You're selling, you talk about building trust in the work that you do with firms. If people don't trust you, they're not going to hire you.
Right. And it's like you talk about, it's at such a premium in a situation where the results aren't experienced until, months or longer after you've delivered. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess back to the exit thing though, it seems like when I would talk to agency owners, like maybe, I don't know, pre-COVID 5 years ago or something, it was a lot more of like, we want to grow, it was a lot more of like, we want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Maybe there was more of a tech influence because there was more money flowing through tech then. So tech is always kind of like the horse that leads the cart.
Yeah.
Now it seems like I less often experience that archetype for an owner. It's usually either somebody that wants to exit but won't tell me until we're like 30 minutes into the conversation, because I'm like, really, like, what are you trying to do here?
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, I'm trying to get out of this, retire in a few years, whatever. That tends to go along with, Gen X boomer more than millennials, but it could happen either way. Or I hear, we're not looking to grow to the moon. I'm looking to have a nice, sustainable, they won't say lifestyle business always. I think that sort of has a negative connotation.
There's a stigma to it.
Yeah.
I mean, my definition of lifestyle agency is an agency where you are getting paid very well, above market compared to if you're working for someone else, plus healthy profit margins. It's not a hobby business. But yes, there is, I think, some stigma there.
Which is interesting because it's like, to have a business that is essentially what people are describing when they say lifestyle business is basically just building a good business, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, it reminds me of the word virtual assistant. It's like one of these like titles that doesn't mean anything, because it's like, you mean somebody that's remote that does certain things that you need done. Isn't that just whatever job you're hiring them for?
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess like getting back to the exit, to kind of like continue with that topic, what do you think exiting looks like for an agency in 2025 versus one that wanted to exit, let's say pre-2020?
Well, if your numbers aren't as strong now as they were pre-COVID, it may take a bit longer to sell. You may be doing a higher earnout, a percentage that you receive based on performance targets after the main deal closes, things like that. In some cases, depending on how your numbers have been and depending on how optional you are in the business, you may struggle to find a buyer at all. Or if you do, they're doing sort of lowball kind of fire sale type offers. Generally, valuation formulas will look at the past 3 years on a weighted basis, looking at your EBITDA, effectively your profit margin with some adjustments. And if the last year was bad, that's going to be the highest weight in the formula. Whereas if you've been able to move past some bad years, things will get better. I guess my key thing would be if anyone is considering selling at some point, start the planning process sooner than later. One of the things I built out for my Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit workshop was an exit plan template. And the idea there is questions to consider to help prepare, because some exits are planned and others happen unexpectedly. Last year, I got an intro to a financial advisor where an agency owner had died unexpectedly in his 40s. And the family was like, what do we do? And they didn't have an exit plan, which, I guess age-wise, it maybe seemed like it didn't make sense. But fortunately, they had someone who was willing to step in and help. And I shared some suggestions and pointed them to an M&A advisor. And ultimately, they were able to sell the business. But, things happen. So the work you do to prepare for the future, whether you want to sell or not, it's going to pay off. As you said, it's about running a good business either way.
Right. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Like you're talking about the questions to consider. Are there any particular questions that you feel like aren't considered often or soon enough when people get to that point?
What are you going to do after you exit? I think people, and I'll do different visualization exercises if I'm working with clients one-on-one, like my advanced retrospective. What is your ideal day after the deal has closed? Either after it's closed or you've received the final earnout payment, you could pick whatever you want. But what are you doing with your time? We did a survey of people in the workshop, and some people wanted to retire completely. That's that. Others were like, I'll do something part-time, maybe do some consulting work on the side, things like that. In the survey, there wasn't a lot of response toward working for the acquiring firm, though likely you will be working for them for some period of time. Maybe not full-time for 2 or 3 years, but certainly, involved. What do you want to do? Anecdotally, my sense is people are like, say, I want to play golf. You're not going to play golf all day long for the next 30 years. Most likely. There are some exceptions. So what do you want to do? The other thing is that there's an existential piece. If you are no longer a business owner, if you are no longer a CEO, who are you? And that could be a scary thing.
Right. I guess with that in mind, like, what are you seeing agency owners do to answer that question before to get out ahead of it, basically?
Certainly working with a therapist or coach can be helpful to talk through that. But you can also talk through with your romantic partner, with friends and others. What do you want to do afterwards? Odds are the people around you have some ideas of what they think you probably want to do. Some may be accurate, others may be off base, but just talking about it is helpful. This can also be a benefit of joining agency communities. For instance, I've been involved in the Bureau of Digital for over a decade. And there are owner-specific channels where you can talk about owners-only related topics as a safe space to have some of those difficult conversations. Find someone or a group of people that you can talk with, probably not your employees. If you have a business partner, you probably will talk about some of it with them, though if your business partnership is not going smoothly, you may not want to discuss that with them yet. But I guess either way, I would encourage you to spend some time processing what you want and getting different perspectives.
Yeah, and it's definitely, a process, and it changes. There's also like value assessments you can do that are kind of interesting, which I think I did the last one 5 years ago. So I'd be curious to see what it is now after having a kid and becoming more boring, basically. So
one of my volunteer activities is with the USO, the Military Connected Charity, and most of the other volunteers are retired. Some are working, but most are retired. And I'm always curious. It's like, so how do you spend your time, outside of volunteering here? And people tend to have a lot of volunteer activities. Maybe it's spending time with family, whether it's kids or grandkids that maybe they had missed out when they were working before. Other people are traveling. People may be writing a book. I mean, there are all kinds of things you could do. One thing to look at would be how do you spend your time now when you have free time, and or what are the things you want to do more of? I know some people are like, well, I'm going to wait until, I want to retire so I can travel. My view is travel now. You don't know what the future holds. You don't know how things are going to be health wise and so on. So I've structured my business so that my client work is remote, but I can also travel as well, whether that's for conferences, client visits, or otherwise. Don't wait. Yes, think about what you want in the future and make some plans for it, but that doesn't mean it's all or nothing.
Yeah, and we've had other people on the show. I forgot who it was, and I apologize if you're listening and blanking on your name. But the whole idea about the sabbatical method, right, where it's like
Mhm.
if you're going to sell the
And
agency,
Alison Caffrey has talked about that.
Allison Caffey.
Yeah.
Sorry, Allison. It's been a little while. So yeah, because it's like if you want to sell, you should be able to take a sabbatical. If you can't take a sabbatical, then you're probably not going to be able to sell very easily anyway. So it's like there's your opportunity to start to answer that question.
I've advised clients on sabbaticals for years. And one of the things, I have an article on my website about extended leave preparation. One of the best things you can do is what I would describe as a stress test. If you're like, I could never go away for a month, I'm like, okay, go away for a few days and see what comes up. Track where, say, your team interrupts you, have your team track where they needed you, but you weren't around, things like that, and then debrief on it. Okay, so do it for 2 or 3 days, then do it for a week, do it for 2 weeks. And by the time you get to being away for a month, you'll have most of it worked out, right? Realizing, oh, you needed to sign a contract. Okay, well, can you delegate certain people to sign certain contracts? There are some risks to that. Or what are the other things you need to sort out so that you don't get interrupted for a longer time away?
Right.
The other benefit of a sabbatical is you come back and you're like, I hate all of this. Head toward the exit. But again, that goes back to planning for your exit sooner than you might think. I read about a firm here in North Carolina, a recruiting firm. They'd been in business for like 20 years. They were a profitable business, and the owners just shut it down. And the issue was that basically they weren't ready to do an earnout. Like they were ready to stop. They didn't want to stick around for a couple of years, and they just shut it down. And obviously they would have taken the cash out of the business and things like that. But my estimate is they probably walked away from $3 million.
Wow.
If only they had started 2 years sooner.
Right. Just thinking about those harder questions.
Yeah.
Makes sense. One thing that came to mind when you were talking, and maybe this is a definition that's obvious to everybody but me, but it was something I was reading maybe on Substack about like the difference between enjoyment and pleasure, right? Where pleasure is passive, it's Netflix, et cetera. And then enjoyment takes action. So it takes, golfing is enjoyment, playing guitar is enjoyment. So if, it takes not just the time to do it, but the energy and the sort of motivation to experience that enjoyment. So that's the sort of thing that, we have to make the time and space for before we just say, I'll figure it out later.
Yeah. And that does require doing some prep beforehand. Like one of the panelists in the Control and Maximize Your Agency exit, Kalila Jones, talked about using her exit to enable a career change, that she'd been thinking about shifting out of doing marketing strategy work, and the exit enabled that. And so now she's doing new work that she's really enjoying that wouldn't have really been possible in running the agency before.
Yeah.
But you know what? If you're thinking of a career change, you could do informational interviews. Reach out to people to say, I'm thinking of changing to this. And it works best if you're getting intros, initially, like download your LinkedIn contacts and see, is someone you already know doing something you want to do in the future? Reach out to them. It can be harder doing cold contacts, but you know what? People often are willing to chat, or at least point you to resources. So, do those informational interviews before you commit to a new career, because you may conclude the career sounded great and shiny on the surface, but the day-to-day reality might not make you happy.
And it's the classic ask for advice, you get money, ask for money, you get advice kind of situation.
Yeah.
So to bounce off of exits, there's probably a lot of other agency owners listening that either just don't have that in mind or they're at whatever stage and they're thinking more about differentiation, right? And what it takes to differentiate as an agency. Can you talk about that a little bit and like what you think it looks like heading into 2025? We're recording this beginning of December 24. Yeah, in terms of like what differentiation looks like.
A key thing to consider is what is the right agency model for your agency. So I think of that. A traditional model is what we could call, or what I would call, the full stack agency model. You're doing the client facing work, you're doing sales and marketing, you're doing project management, you're doing strategy for clients, and you're also fulfilling all of the work through a team of subject matter experts, designers, developers, copywriters, analysts, kind of depending on what your services are. And that's the traditional model. You're doing everything. And on one hand, that's helpful because you're doing everything in house. On the other hand, as sales volume goes up and down, it can be hard to manage that. So the, model that's been around for years is the white label agency, or what we could call the back end agency. They're doing the back end work, and then another agency is selling it and doing the account management piece. There's a newer model that's been growing, which I would call the front end agency. That is where the agency is the face of things. They're doing the client strategy, they're doing account management, they're doing sales and marketing, but they outsource the fulfillment to a back end, a white label agency. The advantage, of course, is that as new business comes in, you send more business to your white label partner, or you may have a couple of them, depending on how much volume. Or if volume goes down, then unfortunately you have less work for the white label partner, but they're working with 50 or 200 different clients. So your particular increase or decrease probably isn't going to put them out of business. They're used to it, and they have their model for that. So consider, do you want a front end agency? In that case, differentiation is vital. If you're running a back end agency, in that case, you need to do good work. That's important. But your partnership and relationship building is going to be with agencies that hire you. Because the reality is, most front-end agencies that I've worked with have gone through several back-end partners before they found one that they really like. So front-end agency, they're differentiating themselves to the end clients. Back-end, it's more about the reliability and about the internal communications processes and things like that.
So it sounds like there's a few different models and there's a couple different jumping off points there. I think one is like, as far as the front end goes, so for the agencies that are going direct to brand,
Yep.
It could go either way for that matter. How are they thinking about setting themselves apart? Like, how do you think about specialization and verticalization, where those trends are going to go in the next year or more?
I mean, I am a fan of vertical specialization. In my work, I focus on helping agencies and specifically helping owners work less and earn more, and rewarding their best team members. So I am a fan of that. Agencies may focus on a couple verticals. If you're focusing on 10 verticals, I'm not sure that's much of a focus. But, for instance, say in home services, maybe you're working with plumbing and HVAC companies, but also roofers. There could be different aspects within that. You could also focus, for instance, on, say, within lawn and landscaping, focused on helping firms that do commercial or residential or both. There are differences within that. So I am a fan of vertical specialization. That does require finding verticals that pay for your help, that are, willing to pay for help, and that they're enough. Years ago, I had a business doing freelance marketing consulting initially for tourist railroads, old-time train rides. Something I'm passionate about. You mentioned my volunteering as a bartender at an antique train. In retrospect, not a big enough market for marketing consulting services. And then I ended up, expanding there. I would also say, do you like working with people in the target market? For instance, if you love cars, working with car dealers is an opportunity to do that. On the other hand, if you don't enjoy working with car dealers, you're probably not going to like that kind of thing. So, it's about finding industries that you enjoy and that are lucrative enough. But I'd say don't dismiss the enjoying working with them. I was getting dinner over the weekend, and two of the employees of the restaurant were talking, and I got the impression that one was preparing for law school, and another said, what do you want to do? And she said, corporate law. And I thought, because it's funny, it's like usually lawyers are like, I want to do public interest or do family law or this or that. And it's like she was going straight to corporate law, which may not be as rewarding emotionally, but it is certainly financially rewarding. So then it becomes, do you get paid tons of money and then do other stuff for fun, or do you need that in your work? So with verticals, make sure you're picking a vertical that you want to stick with. So I do see verticals continuing to be a trend. I would say that of the clients that I've worked with, they're often looking at, say, adding a second vertical or maybe a third. Either if they've saturated their current vertical, they're adding another, or maybe they see an opportunity to expand.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it becomes being able to get enough of a sample size to make that decision, right? Because like the agency will have like one healthcare client and it'll go amazingly or it'll go horribly. And then they'll make a decision based on that, right?
Right.
So I think I think what makes it a hard thing is that you're sort of balancing where can you be useful with what do you like. For me personally, or for I guess what we've seen in our experience, it's almost like the enjoyment aspect can sometimes be downstream of where you're useful, right? So if you're helping clients, you're probably going to be more likely to enjoy that more than if you're not.
Yeah. We seem to have a lot of themes around finding rewarding work,
Yeah.
or a rewarding post-agency work, as well.
Yeah, exactly. That all makes sense. So to bounce around a little bit more, you have this concept that I like a lot called the 3 A's. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. So, when you're communicating with people on your team, sometimes you can get stuck into these sort of conversations that go off the rails. Say an employee comes to you and they mention a problem and they describe the problem and you start jumping into fixing things. Maybe they wanted that and maybe they didn't. Other times something comes up and you get sucked into something and you're like, why did I have to, why did they make me deal with that? They may not have wanted you to deal with that. Or sometimes someone comes to you with something that seems like a small problem, and then actually you do want to get involved. Maybe they don't realize how critical it is. The 3 A's gives you a way to navigate that. And the 3 A's are aware, advise, and actively involved. And the idea is you can actually talk about this in the conversation. An employee comes to you and they say, I am sharing this just to make you aware. So that way you can sit back and listen and not go into solution mode. They're like, so you're aware, here's what's going on, I have a plan. Advise is the kind of next tier or stage up where they're like, okay, here's what's going on, I need your advice. Here's what's happened, here's what I'm thinking about. Maybe I've identified a couple options, or maybe I've never seen this before, I don't even know where to start. Could I get your advice? And then you share your advice. But also notably, you're not jumping in to do it in a hands-on, you're going to go to the client and fix it yourself kind of thing. And then actively involved is you are actively involved, which is maybe something has gone so far off the rails that you do need to get actively involved, or maybe something's happened that it's not your team's job to fix. Like a client in Canada a number of years ago said, one of the clients of the agency was making misogynistic comments to her team. Could she fire the client? I'm like, yeah, of course. And that was a case where it was appropriate for her to step in and fire the client directly rather than having the account manager, given the abusive situation. Now, within that, you can always choose to escalate. Or a team member might say, just to make you aware, and you're like, I'm thinking of this. You can say, I do have some advice on that, and you can share that, or actively involved. You can also de-escalate. You could say, the team member's like, I need you to do this. You might say, well, you know what? I think you can handle this. Let's talk about, maybe you share some advice, and then they implement it. So the 3 A's, aware, advise, actively involved, it will save you from all kinds of extra work that your team probably didn't want you to do, but you always have the option to escalate if appropriate.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like kind of giving people the options of letting them label what's going on.
Yes.
I think that's huge. One thing to maybe tag on to that, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is from Dan Martell, if you've read his book, and the 1-3-1 concept. Are you familiar with that?
Please, how would you describe it?
So I think this slots into place like a puzzle piece with it, probably under the advise part of the 3 A's, which is like 1-3-1, and I might get this slightly wrong, is basically like, if there's an issue wherever, you ask your employee to define the one root cause behind it, offer 3 options for solving, and then offer one recommendation out of those 3.
I like the concept. Depending on the team member's skill set, they may not have the ability to identify the root cause.
Yeah.
I talk about a Venn diagram of 3 circles: desire, competence, and capacity. If people don't have the competence to identify the root cause, then you may have to get a little bit more involved. But Yeah, if they know, I mean, I like the root cause piece. It does depend on if they have enough context. I was speaking with a prospective client earlier today where we would start with my agency growth diagnostic, where I'm looking at where they've been, where they are now, where they want to go, looking at team, clients, time, and so on. And one of the things was, well, could we just go directly to, and it was a particular topic. And it's like, I'm not going to have enough context to give you advice on this very complex, comprehensive topic without doing the agency growth diagnostic first. So it's like, yeah, I'd have some advice, but it wouldn't be informed by enough data.
Right. And that's also probably a good litmus test for whether that's a client you would want. Are they willing, are they open-minded enough to having a different cause than the one they thought it was behind the problem?
Yes, as Blair Enns at Win Without Pitching talks about the polite battle for control.
Yeah, that's a very Canadian concept. I like that phrasing.
Yeah.
So
And his new book, of course, just came out about the 4 conversations. So I'm looking forward to checking that out.
yeah, likewise. That sounds great. So kind of getting towards the end of our time, Karl, what are you working on over the next few months and anything you want to steer people towards?
So you'd mentioned my 3 books. I have a 4th book coming out in 2025. You can get notified about it. So the new book is called Calm the Chaos. Here's a mock-up of the cover. And it's about leadership, how to lead your team with confidence and compassion. Jenny Dietrich of Spin Sucks is writing the forward. And, the idea there is that when you're running an agency, whether you see yourself as a leader and a manager or not, that is part of your job. Unless you move to a fully chair role where you've hired a CEO and they're running the day to day, you are leading and you are managing people. And it's never going to be totally easy, but it doesn't have to be so hard. And in the book, I talk about 10 strategies to make leadership easier. And the calm the chaos came from something one of my clients mentioned a number of years ago, where they'd been really stressed out at the beginning of the call, and I checked in and we talked about where to, what they needed. And I walked through what they were running into and validated their concerns and also then identified some solutions. And when I checked in at the end of the call as to how they were doing, they said that I had helped them calm the chaos, which I just loved hearing that. So that became the title of the book. That comes out in 2025. If you go to calmthechaos.xyz, you can get notified when the book comes out, and you can also get a sample chapter, some bonus material, and links to the various Amazon spots. So that's calmthechaos.xyz.
Great. That sounds good. And you also have, before we forget, you have an event on exits coming up soon.
Yeah, so the live event has happened, but it is now available on demand. So that's the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit. Did that live in 2024. And what started as a 3-part series, it almost turned into a mini conference. There were 9 speakers, panelists of agency sellers and buyers, people selling agencies of range of sizes. The former head of Interpublic focused on M&A, where he bought agencies valued between $2 million and $2 billion. Along with Jonathan Baker of Punctuation, sharing about valuation trends and more. So that's all available in the workshop. And if people are interested, we have a discount code that my team's setting up. So if you enter sales schema as the discount code, you'll save some money on the workshop.
Awesome. You heard it here. Karl, always a pleasure, man. Let's do this again before long. And yeah, have a happy new year if we don't talk sooner.
Thanks, Dan.